Guys, welcome back to yet another episode of Rabbit Hole Stories. We had Margot on the show today. We went down and explored how she got into Bitcoin and some struggles that she has had to endure in institutions, particularly around education, because I know she was doing a PhD. I don't know whether she's still doing that or not, but there's been some politics, and she shared with us her experience about how difficult it can be to promote Bitcoin in institutions, and they're kind of set in their ways a little bit. So that was quite an interesting insight into the whole educational system. Joel, would you agree?
Yes, and I think what was very insightful as well is something I always speculated, like the, that scientists get censored if they don't agree on a certain point or whatever. Right. But she really gave us a couple of insights there, a couple of events. It was also very pleasant chat to hear someone from the very pro-environmental Bitcoin world. She's not a nutter, so she's not going out like, stop using fossil fuels, whatever. She has very sensible points, I think. We also had a brief part in the discussion where we spoke about the coal, fossil fuel Bitcoiners, and so they have their fun fights sometimes on Twitter, but everyone comes together on the common ground, which is Bitcoin. Yeah. And I think it'll be a good episode for everyone in that world and trying to expand what it looks like.
Yeah, she's a physicist, and I like to think that she understands more than I do about the environment and the impact on these things in the world. So it's lovely having people with that insight and education, and they're enduring their own struggles within the institutions. They're trying to break the mold. So we need to sort of rally behind these people, I think, in Bitcoin, because we need them on side to do what's right, and that's to sort of educate people around Bitcoin and its impact on the environment. So I can just see my cat nearly knocking this camera down. So before it does, let's jump down the rabbit hole with Margot. Enjoy, guys.
Welcome, Margot, and it's cool to have you here on Rabbit Hole Stories. How has your day been so far?
The day's been good. It's been relaxing. I took the morning off, did a little yoga.
Nice.
Yeah, doing a self-care day. Was it like in that show Parks and Rec where they're like, treat yourself? So in my morning today is I'm going to treat myself.
That's amazing. I love self-care days. I wish there's more of them available,
yeah,
to be honest.
Yeah.
There's nothing better in my mind just to have a lazy morning under the duvet, maybe watching a bit of rubbish TV, and maybe also doing a bit of yoga, stretching, go to the gym, spend some time outside. Yeah, there's nothing like it. I'm happy for you that you did that. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, seemed like a good day.
Good. Was it a day off Twitter or Nostr, all of these things for you, or were you still online?
No, I was still online, but mostly just not doing work first thing, or usually I exercise in the morning, but today I decided to do just yoga because I did a really intense arm workout where I had to hold my arms like this, and they're really sore still, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll take it easy, let them recover.
I always find it's not the day after I do an intense workout, but it's the day after where I hurt the most. But that's why stretching and yoga is important. It helps with that.
Yeah, it felt really good, so I was glad I made that choice.
Good. Anyway, we digress. we're here with Margot, and as you probably know, Margot, we're interested in people's rabbit hole stories. We want to know how people discovered Bitcoin, and once they discovered it, what was that moment where they're like, I'm going to stay in this space because there's something important here. And obviously you're quite active in the space, particularly around the conversations with Bitcoin, energy, environmentalism. So we can go into that as well, which we'll go into later in the episode. But if you want to spend just a couple of minutes just giving us an introduction to how you fell down this Bitcoin rabbit hole.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I mean, I first learned about Bitcoin in the early 2010s, and I think mostly around WikiLeaks using Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was at the Occupy movement. And But I really didn't understand it too well. I wasn't really that tuned in with the monetary system or the need for a different type of currency. I really actually thought it would be better if we had no money. So that was my opinion at the time. And later on in 2018, though, I started seeing people being deplatformed from content creator websites. And it was people from different backgrounds, didn't matter their political orientation, but if there was a motivation or a vendetta against that person, they could easily be deplatformed. It tends to be kind of arbitrary, and it's really about companies just trying to, save their reputation, and appeal to the average. Or appeal to their venture capitalist investors. So, that started happening, and I realized that there were really only two ways for you to make money online and accept credit cards. That's with Stripe or PayPal. And if you were deplatformed from those, then you really had no opportunity to do that. And a lot of people depend on these small dollar donations. So that's when I thought, well, okay, there's Bitcoin, right? I know about that. I know something about it, but maybe this would be useful. So I actually built a content creator platform and integrated BTC Pay server. And
nice.
And that's how I started getting into Bitcoin, was just this idea that we needed a different set of payment rails that existed outside of the existing monetary system, one where a person could not be deplatformed. Nobody could say whether you could use it or not. And I really valued that a lot. And being a child of the internet, growing up around computers, the internet basically instilled these kinds of values into me just by using the internet. This, the philosophy of open access, freedom of expression, all that is a really big part of what the internet and the World Wide Web was about, especially early on. So that made it really easy for me to finally get into Bitcoin when I did in 2018. And then in 2020, that's when I started thinking more about the environmental side, because I had switched from, I changed my research around to work on climate change and had basically committed my entire life to working on the issue, completely changed my trajectory, and started thinking about whether, using Bitcoin actually was ethical for me, given my stance on the climate. So that pushed me further to research Bitcoin's energy use, and that's really how I ended up here. Long story short, it got me to this point that asking those questions about whether it was ethical got me to where I am now, being a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute and doing this kind of research.
Can you remember the moment when, because you get that touch base, and I guess it's like an inner conflict, because you go down the climate change side, and on the other side you go like, well, I'm kind of using Bitcoin, isn't it, counter-narrative? What was the moment where you went like, oh, there is actually quite a lot of probably undiscovered research where I could dive my head into, and that you actually realized it is actually a net good if you obviously build on a certain standard, I would say. We can probably go into that a bit later on. What was that moment for you?
Let me think about that. Well, I think the moment was probably around when I started to understand the long-term trajectory of Bitcoin mining in terms of the electricity use and the cost, and what are the main drivers of the miners' behavior. And when I realized that they had to search for the cheapest cost electricity, I think that's when I realized, okay, this isn't so bad, because around that time, and I think in 2019, Carbon Brief put out a study that said that the cheapest electricity was now solar energy, solar power. And I thought, well, that means only one thing, that Bitcoin miners are going to have to go towards energy resources like that, or wasted energy. So that gave me a sense that this could actually be useful, and that it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. And even though there were problems and situations where miners were not thinking about the environment in their choices, that in the long term, miners wouldn't really have a choice. They would have to do the right thing. So yeah, it was really in that moment when I realized it. And then all of a sudden, everything started clicking in my head. You know, it was like one thing after the other, and it was just this endless realization of if this is okay, then there's really a lot that we can do with Bitcoin.
This is, in my opinion, why we need people like you in Bitcoin. We need people who are environmentalists, who understand the science behind environmentalism and global warming. And you being a Bitcoiner yourself and invested not only emotionally, but obviously, I'm assuming you've got some Bitcoin behind your belt as well, in terms of, you know, you've invested in it with your own money. Your interest in Bitcoin and the environment, and you being a fellow at this institute, is allowing advocacy for environmentalism in the Bitcoin space. So we need people who are environmentalists, because I think there's quite a lot of people out there that don't really care about the environment. I care about the environment. Joelle, you as well, and we've discussed this more than once. And there's a lot of discourse, there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of different narratives being thrown around about the environment. So, you know, thank you for the work that you do. And I enjoy the articles that you write, and it educates me about the environment, things that I never knew before. So, you know, not only now I'm invested in Bitcoin, I'm invested in all the things that it impacts. And you can go down a variety of different rabbit holes. And you're in two, if you like. You're in the environment rabbit hole as well as the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I imagine you're trying to build a bridge between the two. Would I be right in saying that?
Yes, trying is definitely the key word in that sentence. We are trying. I'm not the only one trying these days, which is really great, but it's a big challenge to try to connect the two communities. And I'll be the first to say that sometimes it feels completely fruitless, we're not ever going to reach them. And it's not even so much that we want to convince them that Bitcoin is great or that they should be orange pilled, but it's mostly like, even just at bare minimum, to get them to even consider some of our points and to think a little bit differently, rather than trying to just punish Bitcoin or shame people who use it. But instead, you know, it would be great if we could get them to at least consider how we could make them, how we could get them to change their tactics so that they would try to, you know, gently push Bitcoin in a more sustainable direction, if that's the goal, you know. So we just don't have that, we don't even have that common ground where we can have that discussion. So it's challenging, but yeah, trying to be that bridge. And it takes a lot of patience, and sometimes I fail at that too, admittedly, so it's hard.
Well, this is why you need self-care days in yoga, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess it's also hard because my personal experience is when I talk about, you know, stranded energy, renewable energies, everyone is sort of hyping it up, and the moment you just mention Bitcoin, sort of everyone freezes, and you sort of feel the vibe in the room changing. And that's pretty interesting, because I'm going, well, it uses all of these benefits I just spoke about 15 seconds ago. But just because I said that one word, it sort of, it flips the switch in the back of their head that they go, oh no, I don't want to be in touch with this.
Yeah.
Which I guess is what you see with like the whole Greenpeace FUD, or change the code FUD, or whatever you want to call it. Because it's quite remarkable. I think the only thing keeping it alive are Bitcoiners, essentially. So maybe if we would shut up all for a month, maybe the whole thing would vanish. We don't know.
Yeah, I think most of the change the code Twitter profiles followers are Bitcoiners.
Right.
that campaign's not going too well for them.
No, it backfired a little bit, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a little.
What I was interested in asking you, Margot, is because I know recently you were doing, or still doing, a PhD in environmentalism, and what I was interested in trying to find out from you is how have you found the institutions and their supportiveness of Bitcoin in the work that you do in the space?
Not very supportive.
Yeah, that was my assumption.
I mean, first of all, I think a lot of academics don't understand Bitcoin. I think that's a given. But also, they read the New York Times and they read, the FUD, and that's their main. That's what they really think Bitcoin is. It's just a lot of the negative press. That's all they really interact with. So there's a lot of layers there, and it's hard to get them to see past that because they're like, well, it was in the New York Times. It was this peer-reviewed article. Which was generally are all written by Alex DeVries and his cohort. So that's the problem. But yeah, not really receptive. I mean, I had my own challenges with my advisor in the department, and so
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's not easy. I think that there are actually people in the university who are professors even who are Bitcoiners, but they keep it a secret. And I know a few of them because they've told me personally on Twitter. They're like, yeah, I'm in this so-and-so department, but nobody knows. I use a fake account. I use an anonymous account on Twitter, and so because there's just too much backlash around Bitcoin. So yeah, it's unfortunate that people have to keep it a secret because they're worried that they could be fired for it. On the other hand, climate activists also come under a lot of pressure at the academy too for being activists. And I know of two climate scientists, one who was fired and the other who was under ethical investigation for standing up at a very, very well-known conference in the climate geological sciences community. This conference is called AGU, the American Geophysical Union conference, and it's a big deal. I mean, it's like anything planetary related, whether it's astronomy or climate change or whatever, climate science. That's the kind of conference that is. It covers those issues, and these two climate scientists, got up on stage and unveiled a banner saying something like, we needed to basically get out of the labs and get into the streets and protest.
Right.
And because they did that, they got in serious trouble.
It almost feels like the film in 80 Days Around the World, where the academy is trying everything that the main character doesn't fulfill his mission, which if you think about it, doesn't that go against every ethos in the scientific world? Doesn't science live off debate, trying to find different approaches and solutions? So they didn't even say buy Bitcoin essentially on the sign. They just stood there and spoke openly about saying, let's challenge the open narratives and think about different solutions to think. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. It was just a call to action to their fellow scientists saying, it's enough of us hiding in our laboratories. We need to be out in the streets and demanding change around climate change. And they got in big trouble for it. But the academy, the universities are really not designed, I think, for free thinking as much as we think that they are. And that is a lesson that I learned as a graduate student, is that there is much more. It's very political, very much like you need to follow orders and not dissent, because if you do, we will root you out and we will make your life miserable, or we will stop you from advancing in your career. And it's really unfortunate that happens at the university, because it's really counter to what the university should be. And I think maybe, at some point, universities really were much more free in that regard, but times have changed.
Yeah, you would think, because if you look back, let's take the internet as an example. The internet was literally, I mean, it sort of had its backstory with like the military and all of these things, but it thrived in like an academic environment, and it was highly accepted very early on. So you would think that these kind of people would also accept the technology behind Bitcoin. But I guess that was a different generation looking back now. So you're right, in like the 32 years that developed.
It was a different generation. It also, they were physicists, which as a physicist, I'm going to say, we are a little bit different, and maybe we think a little differently from other people. But also, the other important point is that it was invented by academics, I think. And so, and it was invented, with kind of, I think, approval from government funding and whatever, whereas Bitcoin is something that was invented or discovered outside of the academic world, certainly rooted in the findings in the literature around cryptography, of course, but it didn't come out of a laboratory or a research group or from a professor. It was, an anonymous person or a group of anonymous people that released it on a mailing list online. It's a very different thing. And I think that also makes it harder for academics to accept as well.
It's frustrating that in academia, you've got academics relying on a mainstream media outlet for their content and for their understanding of the world. They should be more critical and curious being in academia. But hearing you talk about it, it does make sense that it becomes almost this kind of institution with its own set of ethics and rules, and it's then hard to break free from that confine if you're talking about something as abstract as Bitcoin is, which makes me question scientific data. It makes me question, particularly from central authorities, and how reliable or neutral or unbiased it is. Is that something you've come across in your scientific world, about curious scientific studies?
Yeah, I mean, as an undergrad doing science, I was exposed to a little bit of controversy around peer review when I was at JPL at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is one of the NASA facilities in the US. And it was around this concept of the origins of life. And there was a geochemist who worked in the science building, and he was the editor of a really controversial journal. And they had really controversial ideas about how life began on the planet. And, it's very hard to get stuff like that published in mainstream journals because it's not accepted. It's really heterodox. And I think that's, I didn't really realize at the time what the implications of that really meant overall for the scientific field in terms of advancing research and being open to change. Another thing that happened was also related to this. So this was all in astrobiology because I was there as an astrobiology instrumentation intern. And there was a group that was studying, they were studying these extremophiles in, I think, Mono or Moro Lake, something like that, in California. It was a very, very interesting lake. And there were these extremophiles, which are just like microorganisms that live in very hostile environments, extreme environments. And they thought that they had discovered that they had a DNA backbone that was different from, most biology. And I forget what it was, what was the element that was replaced. Like it was like a phosphorus for arsenic or something like that. Anyway, they gave a presentation about this at one of these big conferences, and they were ripped apart, and eventually they were completely discredited, and I'm not sure exactly, but it really affected their careers. They might have been wrong, they might have been wrong. Maybe their methodology wasn't right, but the blowback that they got was really, really extreme. So this is the kind of environment that real science is like. It is not,
Right.
It can be very hostile. And if you have a different opinion, you can really suffer a lot of reputational damage if you're not careful.
Right.
So, none of that really registered for me at the time in terms of, what the broader implications were of hearing about these stories. But now that I'm being, I do all this Bitcoin work and I've made it this far in my career to the PhD, passing doing all the requirements and the qualifications and getting to the thesis point and just being in this world long enough. Now I see, how dangerous that can be for people who are trying to do something that's a little bit different.
Because it's the fear. At the end of the day, the only real weapon they have is fear. Because people are scared of, hey, if I say this. And what really blows my mind is it's not even they're saying, like, buy Bitcoin on a signal or whatever. It's just, hey, maybe there's a different approach to things, which you would think, especially physicists or also biologists, from my understanding, would appreciate. Can you remember what kind of the different narrative in their approach or their journal was? Was it 180 degrees completely different to what we usually know or read, or was it just something in particular in the evolution of humankind which they questioned?
Well, I think it had to do with how spontaneous, the spontaneous organization of the various elements that we find, or organelles that we find in a cell, or like DNA, for example, and RNA. And if I recall, this is a while ago for me, but there's these vents, these geothermal vents underground in the ocean. And I think one of the theories, the theory is like that the conditions were possible, there were like these reactions that were possible in these geologic formations, or I think around these vents, hydrothermal vents. So I guess there's something about that that's a little controversial, and it's not really accepted. And he had this journal, and it was not very well regarded. So
I mean, what should be known is that there is so much unknown that we are yet to learn about the world in which we live, and we're obviously creating more and more technologies and advancing technologies, and with the Bitcoin mining side and using renewable energies, because we're incentivized to seek out cheap or free electricity. So with that in mind, what work have you seen that's positive towards what Bitcoin miners are doing in the mining space, and what work is there yet to be done?
Yeah, well, there's always a lot of work to be done, but I am seeing good things in terms of mining companies that are thinking more of themselves as like a vertically integrated energy company.
Okay.
And they're using Bitcoin as part of their renewable energy portfolio to basically create a floor for their revenue. So there's a problem with solar and wind in that they, regionally, if you have a lot of solar farms in the same location, they're all going to produce the same amount of power at the same time. There's really no way to compete in that regard. So you're all of them are going to be selling their solar at the same time and for the same price. So that can really eat at their revenue. And if too much comes online too fast, they might have modeled that, well, we're going to have to curtail some of our power, which means we're just going to have to waste it, can't sell it. And the grid operator might say to them, well, we forecast that you're only going to have to curtail 10% of your power production. But then once they get connected to the grid, the operator might say, well, we redid our forecast, and actually you're going to have to curtail 20%.
Right.
And now it's like, well, okay, that's going to cut into my return on investment. My investors aren't going to be happy. Maybe it's cheaper to just, let this sit like a stranded asset, So being able to use Bitcoin mining in that regard can create a floor in terms of revenue, so that way you minimize that risk. So there are Bitcoiners who are working in the industry who are thinking like this and who are actually reaching out to other energy producers to get them to co-locate a Bitcoin miner, for example. And there's others that are actually trying to set up solar farms with battery, like a solar farm with battery, for example, and optimize between selling to the grid, running a Bitcoin miner, or charging a battery. And I think that's really cool because there's some potential there to actually offset a natural gas peaker plant using that model. And if you can monetize that when the power is not necessary for the grid, using Bitcoin miners, you're now incentivizing the reduction of emissions on those marginal generators, which is something people have been talking a lot about. Like basically, when we say like marginal emissions or marginal generation, it's all really these power producers come online whenever there's a change in demand. So
right.
that's what the marginal aspect is about. So if you can replace those with something that's low carbon intensive, like a solar and battery combination, and monetize that with Bitcoin mining, well, now you've reduced those marginal emissions that people are talking about, and that's a net win for everybody. So
right.
Those are the things that really excite me in the mining space, is hearing these stories and seeing that people are trying to do that, as well as the mitigating methane emissions. That's really cool and really important, especially because methane is turning out to be a really important gas, much more important than we realized in terms of the warming impact and the near term impact. So yeah, those are the things that excite me. There's a lot of work to do, and it's all very, 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 very new, and it's just really exciting to be part of such a young and exciting industry.
Can I ask you about these numbers we constantly reading, like how much of the whole mining industry is already adopting the renewable side? I think it fluctuates between, I'm going by like Daniel Batten's numbers, so I'm going with like 52 to I think 59, 58 something percent. And we read about the 6% adoption in renewables per year. In your opinion, is that a realistic number? Because that would mean 5, even 10 years into the future, it could be a fully renewable industry with all of these benefits you just listed. Or are we far off there? Because like sometimes in the Bitcoin media, they tend to hype a lot of stuff up that is not always paying out to be true completely.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype. I haven't had time to really go over Daniel's numbers, so I can't really speak one way or another on them. I know that he's spoken with a lot of mining companies, and so he's basing it off of that. But I do think, though, in the long term, yeah, we should see Bitcoin miners decarbonize on their own and moving towards wasted or curtailed power, or integrating within the energy industry as they are starting to do now. I think that there will still be flared gas on, in the network, and you can debate over how much some of that is actually mitigating emissions, but overall, yeah, I mean, it'll be wasted energy at least, so it won't necessarily be, at least I think it won't necessarily be new fossil fuel generation. I don't think that's going to be very practical in the near term as the halving continues. So it will be like wasted energy, wasted fossil fuel energy, or it'll be, renewable curtailed power integration, this whole energy arbitrage, or it'll be Bitcoin miners integrating into the electrical grid, which I think is going to be very competitive to do. So not everyone will be able to succeed at that, but the competition is really good. So that's a net bonus for the network. Makes it hard for, I'm hoping it makes it hard for anyone to grow too big and monopolize too much, which is, is the opposite of what we want when we're thinking about maintaining decentralization.
So what are your thoughts then in stuff like the whole nuclear mining stuff? Because I read this and in the back of my head it goes like, okay, but surely I see more potential, for example, in the methane gas emissions and all of these things. What are your first thoughts if someone asks you this?
I think it's great. I mean, I guess I would say I'm like an energy maximalist in terms of, I think all low carbon energy should be brought online as much as possible, whether it's nuclear, geothermal, solar, wind, hydro. So long as it's sustainably done and done in a way that minimizes the environmental impact, I think we should do it. So I'm not opposed to nuclear. I think there's a lot of really good things going on there with the small modular reactors and tying that with Bitcoin. Bitcoin can add flexibility to those energy producers. So I think that's a really good thing too. In the short term, though, I mean, that industry is not at that exponential growth phase that we're seeing with solar and wind. So right now, as great as all of the conversation is, the reality is that we can't meet our goals with nuclear at this moment. It's unfortunate because we could have. I think there was an opportunity where we could have actually made this whole energy transition a lot easier if we hadn't been so afraid of nuclear. There was a lot of fear around that nuclear war, and it's unfortunate that happened, but we can't change the past. We can only change the future, or make the future. So I'm hoping that we will see a kind of nuclear renaissance, and that will help us with our long-term energy goals around climate change.
It's really interesting, and I'm thinking back to your original the way you got into Bitcoin. Am I right in thinking that really you were kind of passionate about environmentalism only then around 2018 or a couple of years after that? And because it seems like you've done a wealth of studying and reading, because you're obviously very knowledgeable about energy and the environment. So it's obviously something that you've taken a long time to understand. Was that because of Bitcoin, or was that just a happy accident?
Well, I think when I was studying at NYU, that was when I took a biology course called Principles of Biology. And they had a module on climate change. They would do these modules like every week or so. They would change topics just so you would get a broad understanding of all the areas of biology. Maybe it was like 4-week modules or something. And so they did one on climate change. And that was really the moment where I said, okay, yeah, this is really important. This is real. And I have to take it seriously. But at the time, I really didn't. At the time, there wasn't as much urgency, because this was like around 2009 when I took that course, and the IPCC reports were not as intense as they are now. So it was more like the urgency at that time was around getting people to say, yes, climate change is real, because there was a lot of most of the discussion at the time was, is it real? Is it not? And that was the debate. So their main objective was just to get us all to realize this is real. So that really, I guess you could say, planted the seed for me. And then in 2015 or so, I started thinking more about it. And then in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected president, Emmanuel Macron, who's the president of France, is not doing too well over there right now.
Not too well at all. No.
Sinking, yeah. At the time, he got up and made a video and said, climate scientists in the United States, please come to France, where we believe in climate change and we're trying to work on solutions. You can come and work with us. Right. And they had this application for him, and any scientist could apply for it. And I remember sitting in my first year of my PhD in the physics department with other graduate students, and we were talking about this video, and I looked at it and went through the application, and I thought, well, I would love to do this, but I'm just a first year in physics. I have nothing to offer. I can't do anything. I just have to accept my fate that there's nothing that I can do. But then I just, that was always there with me subconsciously. And then in 2018, I realized, okay, this is really important. I have to do something. I don't know what. And that's really how I got into being a climate activist and changing my life and switching departments. I realized.
Let's talk, if that's okay with you, a little bit about the whole Greenpeace situation at the moment and their narrative around environmentalism, because my understanding, albeit limited, about Greenpeace is something I used to see adverts about on the TV when I was growing up and things like that, and I thought, they're doing right by the environment and that's surely a good thing. And it was only when I came into Bitcoin and started to look under the hood with regards to environmentalism and energy usage in Bitcoin, where there was a lot of negative narratives about Greenpeace, and it was only then I started to realize about their approach and their grassroots origins and where they are now. What is your understanding of Greenpeace, and do you have any strong opinions about what they're doing out there in relation to the message they're putting out about environment?
Yeah, they seem very institutionalized at this point. I mean, they're big, really big NGO. They're very much tied to governments. And I think that it's hard to start off as a grassroots organization and grow that big and not be captured and influenced by the state, really, and the interests of governments. And I think that Greenpeace is an example. They're influenced by certain players that dictate their motivations, whether they want to admit that or not. And, for them, this is their day job. This is what they do. We're all sort of scrappy, activists here in Bitcoin in our own ways. And we're not really well organized. We're not very well funded like they are. And it shows, it shows in their motivations. I don't really like all of their tactics that they've taken on in the past either. And now that I see what they've been doing around Bitcoin, it really also makes me go back and think about some of their tactics in the past and see them in a different light as well. And think about what really is their motivation. And they are really conservative, I would say, in a lot of ways, and they are also very, very, very risk averse. But it's also kind of ironic to be so risk averse as well, because you're trying to protect what you already have, like the system. You don't want to disrupt it, but the system itself is inherently unstable. So there's a little bit of a contradiction in their line of thinking, I think. Yeah, they mean well, but they don't recognize that they're also doing harm in their approach.
And I guess that goes all into most of these now bigger organizations, because that's one of the reasons, for example, I stopped talking about this stuff with my friends who have a very simple background, similar background to you, like academia or, already very early activists in their teenage lives and such. And they sort of all became part of that corporation who just shouts hypocrisy left, right, and center. Also the Greenpeace stuff. Ian and I did a video earlier this week where I had to sort of pull myself together because we couldn't use a lot of the video. I was swearing quite a lot, and that's not really good on YouTube. I had to beep out a lot of stuff in the edit. And on the one hand, what really annoyed me about the Greenpeace stuff, also at the Skull of Satoshi, beautiful that it backfired for them. But you sort of go like, oh, Bitcoin incentivizes an unfair system, it harms the planet. But you literally take a bribe from Ripple, who has defrauded like retail investors to dump their tokens and give you $5 million. I even read reports that apparently it's more than 5 million. That's a bit unsure, but I don't know. It's never been verified. But yeah, that's a crazy thing, isn't it? Like the hypocrisy, it shouts from all ends of the spectrum. But like we are the bad guys because we're really trying and change something in the world for the better good.
Yeah. Yeah, I also wanted to curse a lot too.
You can curse on the podcast, by the way.
All that spell of Satoshi. But no, not now. I'm fine now. But at first, yeah, I was really angry. Yeah, it's just it's a lot of not really thinking, systems thinking, I think. They're just very reactive. In their
it's sort of like all of these memes and infographics you see online where like the whole herd is shouting in one direction and there's maybe like one guy thinking, well, hang on, if everyone is shouting in that direction, something is wrong here. Maybe we even need to question our own narratives. And from my experience, that's what like the Bitcoin community does quite well. Not everyone. There's some groups who like ignore every fact thrown at their way if it doesn't suit their narratives. But I think we're very open to look at different discussion points and going like, oh, so there is a possibility to do it a different way. And I think that's lost in all of these big activism groups because they were captured by complete corruption or complete power, however you want to put it.
There are quite a lot of Bitcoiners, though, that are... I've come across them. I don't know about you, Margot, but like who are
I don't know what you're talking about.
Climate deniers and like
they never show up in my notifications and say things
I can imagine.
Me.
Yeah, do you know what? I might have to start doing something like that myself because I get sucked in sometimes, and it's probably I need to take a break from some of the narratives that are going out there because it's frustrating because I mean Bitcoin's for everyone, right? And no matter who you are, what you think, your ideology and things like that, it's a neutral thing. But yeah, there are some strange people in this space who believe strange things, and I suppose there is room for that, and there's room for discussion and disagreement and discourse and critical thinking and critical discussions, because that's the only way we're going to make progress, right? But in my mind, some people are I was going to swear there, Joel, but I'm trying not to. Idiotic.
I can beep it out. I mean, it's an easy edit.
Yeah, no, I was just on my rant about Bitcoiners who frustrate me, to be fair, Margot. So if you've got anything to say about that or not, that's fine.
Some Bitcoiners are as dogmatic and closed-minded as the Greenpeace people are. That's for sure.
Right.
I have encountered them too. I think Twitter doesn't really encourage discourse, so that's a problem. And the algorithm encourages yelling and being angry at each other because that sells. Those kind of emotions really sell very well.
Yes.
And YouTube algorithm is also the same, and you probably pretty much make the same argument for newspapers. Mm-hmm. They're going for clickbait, so I think that also drives the way that they frame the stories around Bitcoin and other things as well. But but at the same time, I think what's different about Bitcoin is that we sort of have to accept that there are a diversity of opinions in this space. Mm-hmm. And we're all here because we like Bitcoin, and we just kind of have to be like, well, Bitcoin is not, it's a network that says anyone can use it. If you want to use it, you can. And I can't stop you just because we don't agree on a certain philosophical view or ideological view. And it forces us to try to see beyond some of that and work together. I mean, I like to, fight a little bit with Steve Barber on Twitter, and Steve makes these tweets about
That's the
coal.
mustache guy, right?
Yeah.
That's the guy with the beautiful mustache, yeah.
Yeah. I think his company's called Upstream Hosting or something like that. Sorry, Steve, I got that wrong. But, you know, he makes these tweets about, like, learn to coal or something like that. And he did this AI art of Greta with a bowl of coal, you know, of Greta Thunberg. And, I mean, it cracks me up. Like, he's a really nice guy, you know, classic, nice Canadian guy who grew up in the oil fields. And we have just really different life experiences. But at the same time, you know, we both care about Bitcoin, so I have to learn, and he and I have to learn to get along as well to make sure that those particular goals are come to fruition around Bitcoin. But and I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to learn, to be forced to do that, and that is missing outside of the Bitcoin world.
Because you can't choose. Definitely, you can't choose who jumps in the lifeboat with you. You know, you're in that lifeboat huddled together. And
depends. If you're on the Titanic, like you and I would be lost, Ian.
Yeah, we probably would be. But there's plenty of room on that bit of wood for him to climb up on, right?
Kick Leo off and take the door.
Yeah, let's kick him off.
Yeah. But like get on the lifeboat with all these people. We all agree that we're here and we're safe in under Bitcoin, and we understand what it is. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
And that's what I meant earlier. Like, there is a common denominator where, like, everyone knows, okay, if shit hits the fan, like if the White House puts out a horrendous report, everyone sticks together and comes up and helps in their own field, whether that be the mining thing, whether that be monetary policy experts. That's sort of the common ground. And I think Margot made a very good point. That's missing in the worlds outside of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
From my experience as well, especially in like the crypto world. They like to say like, oh, you know, we accept X, Y, and Z. But once like there is a little bit of fraction between them, it really breaks off very dramatically. And it becomes very, very nasty quickly. So I think that's one of the things which I appreciate. Margot, I do want to ask you on one thing, because I remember you had an interview with Max, I'm going to butcher his last name. Is it Galgliardi or his last? The energy guy?
Yeah, I don't know how to say his last name.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes. He has a weird last name.
Gagliardi or something like that.
Something along those lines, yeah.
He's a nice guy.
You're obviously, I think, take quite a, is it safe to say, an anti-fossil fuel stand? And there are people who have been very successful with taking a very pro-fossil fuel stand, in particular Alex Epstein. Have you managed to set the debate with him, or is he still chickening out?
Well, last I heard was from the Bitcoin Miami organizers last year, which was that he had agreed and had sent some conditions, but
why is he getting to set the conditions? Anyway, go on. Sorry, go on.
I guess because I challenged him. I don't know.
Fair enough. Go on.
But I haven't heard anything since, so I have a feeling that it's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I would still do it. I think for a while I was, you know, I was having a lot of stuff going on at the university, so I was kind of glad that they didn't really follow through. But yeah, I would think it would be kind of entertaining still to you know, have a debate. But you know, the thing is he's a little bit disingenuous because he wants a debate around a very specific proposition, which is like that if you don't quickly eliminate fossil fuels, then that will lead to climate catastrophe. You know, like the rapid elimination of fossil fuels. So he's basically saying, I have to take a position that says that I believe that I'm going to argue that without the rapid elimination of fossil fuels, we will have climate catastrophe. And I mean, I don't even know, how do I define climate catastrophe? And what do you mean by the rapid elimination of fossil fuels? Because the reality is that nobody is arguing for the rapid elimination of fossil fuels. The IPCC reports aren't saying that. What they're saying is that we need to rapidly decarbonize, and we need to stop bringing on new resources of fossil fuels, because for one thing, this whole decarbonization process is going to cause millions or billions of dollars of stranded assets. So it doesn't make sense to make these investments. But also, if you do, then you're saying that you're basically guaranteeing that we will continue to have emissions well into the future, and the goal should be to reduce those emissions permanently. So these are not it's not like a rapid elimination timeline. And the reality is that our entire civilization is wrapped up in fossil fuels. My clothes, my headset, my hat, everything, my couch, our food, our medicine is tied up. Petrochemicals, all that is tied up to the oil industry because it was very cheap, right? It became a very cheap resource. Yeah. So it's not really a fair proposition. It's not one that I'm comfortable with. I really want to just debate the claims that he makes in his book, which I think are misleading and are making people think that climate activists want to destroy the world, take everything from them, not let human flourishing happen, whatever that means, and that climate people who care about the climate and the IPCC people want to increase suffering, and this is not the truth.
Yeah, I guess, and that blends into what we spoke about earlier, like the hypocrisy and stuff. And I'm glad that you mentioned like our clothes and all of these things are made of, because if I speak to my activist friends, they go like, fuck oil companies and stuff, but then they have like the newest iPhone, and I go like, well, there's a bit of a we can talk about this stuff, right? Or like, for example, I have a zero waste shop where I live, about 5 minutes away from me, which I love. I can take my glasses, I can go there. Everything is fresh and stuff. And they sort of buy everything at Tesco's. Tesco's is like, I think, Walmart in America and all of these companies. So I go, there's a lot to debate there. But I'm glad you brought it up, because one of my bullet points for our talk today was like, okay, I'm more the guy, I think I get that no one has to reproduce fossil fuels, but surely we can't just hit the magic button and tomorrow everyone is off fossil fuels. I think the world would break down at the end of the day, and all of the third world countries wouldn't have any access to cheap energy anymore. To get to the end of the episode, if there is one thing for the Bitcoiners who are still skeptical, because in the back of their head they have this narrative of like, those are like all Greta's standing there with like signs and not doing anything or something like this, what would be your message for them to get started and try and have an open mind to discover that different rabbit hole apart from the whole rabbit hole with Bitcoin?
Let's see. I'm really bad at this question because I don't have any resource right in front of me. I know, but there's a really nice group of people on Telegram that's a Bitcoiner environmentalism group. And I think that's a really good resource, because you can just go in there and ask, and they'll tell you like, oh yeah, read this article or read this.
Wait, they're like Bitcoin environmentalist group?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
I didn't
cool.
notice.
Yeah,
really cool. It's a small group, but yeah, they're really cool people. And I hang out in there with them sometimes, or I'm in the channel, but I chat.
It's great because Bitcoiners always find a way to get together and discuss their interests, right? Whether it's environmentalism or politics or anything like that. We're very good at creating spaces for each other, so that's really positive.
Yeah, different people have written essays, and there's like green Bitcoiners out there who have written stuff. I just can't remember their names. It's really bad.
No, you and me both, Margot. I can never remember a name. Sometimes
we just
I
know
don't
the
remember my own
pictures,
name.
Yeah, exactly. My stuff, my writings, I guess, might be helpful. But I think definitely, if you're really interested, you should join this Telegram group. And I can give you a link.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
We can put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Because I think that's really the best place, because they're really, that's where everything is happening in that group, I think, for the most part. So I would say, join that Telegram group and ask them questions. They're all really enthusiastic people.
It's also a great resource for me, because I have to scrap through like all of my bookmarks every time I need to write an article about why mining is good for the environment. So that's like a star somewhere in my bookmarks to get in and ask.
Yeah.
Margot, it's been brilliant having you on. Thank you for your time. I've learnt a lot, and it's been an interesting conversation, so thank you.
Yeah, it was great having you on, Margot. And for anyone listening, make sure to check out the links in the show notes. And Margot, you've also been at a few events in Europe, right? So who knows? They might be seeing you at the next Bitcoin event.
Yeah, hopefully. I was supposed to be at a conference in Wales, but unfortunately the conference got cancelled. It was going to be in May, so I won't be going to the UK this spring after all. But we'll see, maybe in the summer or the fall, I'll get invited out there again. It was a lot of fun being at the UK Bitcoin conference in Edinburgh, so I would love to do that again, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, and we'll see you soon then.
Yeah, thank you both. Take care.